It was a stormy night in the small town of Ridgewood, a night when most people were bundled up inside their homes, enjoying the warmth of a cozy fire or the hum of a heater. The rain poured relentlessly, hammering the asphalt roads and turning the streets into shimmering rivers. For most, it was just another inconvenient storm. For Clara and her 2 young children, it was the culmination of weeks of desperation. Clara sat in the front seat of her aging sedan, gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled tension. The car had sputtered to a stop on the side of the highway, its engine emitting one final, pitiful groan before going completely silent. The dashboard lights blinked mockingly at her. In the back seat, her 2 children, 7-year-old Lily and 3-year-old Max, were huddled under a thin blanket, trying to stay warm. They didn't complain, but their shivers spoke volumes. She was out of options. The car, once her lifeline, had become her prison. They had been living in it for weeks after an eviction notice left them with nowhere to go. Clara had tried to hold it together for her kids, but tonight felt like the breaking point. She stared at her phone, its battery clinging to life at 5%, debating whether to call the one friend she hadn't already exhausted with pleas for help. But who would drive out in this storm to rescue a single mom with no money and no plan? Just as she was about to give up, headlights appeared in her rearview mirror, cutting through the sheets of rain. The vehicle slowed as it approached, and Clara's heart raced. In this weather, anyone stopping could mean help, or danger. The truck pulled over, its engine rumbling, and out stepped a man in a soaked leather jacket and a worn baseball cap. His face was rugged, lined with years of hard work and, perhaps, hard times. Jake didn't look like a savior, but he also didn't look like someone to fear. He tapped on her window, and Clara hesitated before rolling it down an inch. The cold, wet air rushed in, carrying the scent of rain and oil. "You need some help?" Jake asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. "My car, it just died," Clara stammered. "I don't know what's wrong with it." Jake nodded, pulling a flashlight from his pocket. "Pop the hood. Let me take a look." Clara hesitated. She didn't know this man, didn't know if she could trust him. But what choice did she have? With trembling fingers, she reached for the hood release. Jake went to work, his flashlight beam bouncing through the downpour as he inspected the engine. It didn't take him long to assess the situation. "This thing's in rough shape," he said, straightening up and wiping rain from his face. "Alternator's shot, and the battery's about as useful as a brick. You're not going anywhere tonight." Clara's heart sank. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Jake noticed the children in the back seat, their wide, frightened eyes peeking out from under the blanket. His expression softened. "Tell you what," he said. "I've got a tow truck back at my shop. Let me get you off this highway. It's no place to be stranded, especially with kids." "No, Clara began, but Jake cut her off. "Look, I'm not asking for payment or anything. I just don't feel right leaving you here. You'll freeze before morning." His words, firm yet kind, left no room for argument. Clara nodded, tears pricking her eyes as she whispered, "Thank you." Jake returned an hour later with his tow truck, the storm still raging around them. Clara bundled her kids into the truck's cab while Jake secured her car to the back. They drove in silence, the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the radio filling the air. Jake's shop wasn't far, just on the outskirts of town, but to Clara, it felt like miles away from her misery on the highway. The shop was a modest, cluttered space with tools hanging on the walls and the faint smell of grease and metal lingering in the air. Jake guided Clara and the kids into a small waiting area, where a dusty couch and a coffee machine stood in stark contrast to the chaos of the garage. He handed her a towel and a blanket he had pulled from the back room. "Dry off. I'll take a closer look at your car tomorrow," he said. "For now, make yourself at home." Home. The word stung. Clara hadn't had one of those in months. She wrapped the blanket around her children and sat down, the weight of the night's events pressing down on her. Jake disappeared into the garage, but she could hear him muttering to himself as he prepared the tools he'd need in the morning. As the storm began to ease, Clara looked around the room. On one wall was a faded photo of a younger Jake, standing beside a woman and a dog. They looked happy, carefree. She wondered what his story was, why he had stopped to help her when so many others had driven past without a second glance. The next morning, Jake emerged from the garage, wiping grease from his hands. "Your car's gonna need a lot of work," he said. "Honestly, it'd be cheaper to scrap it and start fresh." Clara's stomach dropped. "I don't have money for another car," she admitted. "I don't even have money to fix this one." Jake sighed, scratching his head. "I figured as much. Tell you what, we'll work something out. I've got some old parts lying around. They're not new, but they'll do the job. And I can't charge you labor fees, not in good conscience." Clara was stunned. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jake hesitated, his eyes distant. "Let's just say I've been in a rough spot before. Someone helped me out when I needed it most. Maybe it's my turn to pay it forward." The words hit Clara like a wave. She didn't know what to say, so she simply nodded, tears streaming down her face. Jake went back to work, and over the next few days, the shop became a haven for Clara and her children. Jake's apprentice, a young man named Sam, brought the kids snacks and showed them how to use some of the simpler tools, keeping their spirits high while Jake worked tirelessly on the car. But it wasn't just about the car. Jake's act of kindness was a spark, one that would ignite something much larger than either of them could have imagined. Clara woke the next morning to the faint hum of activity in the shop. She had spent the night on the old couch in the waiting area, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of motor oil and something else, something comforting. Her children were still asleep, curled up together with their heads resting on each other like two puzzle pieces perfectly fitted. She watched them for a moment, a pang of guilt stabbing her. They deserved so much better than this, and no matter how hard she tried, life seemed determined to keep her down. The smell of coffee brewing pulled her from her thoughts. Jake was in the back, pouring himself a cup from an ancient machine that looked older than Clara. He glanced up when he saw her and gave a small nod. "Morning," he said, his voice as rough as gravel but not unkind. "You sleep okay?" Clara nodded, though the stiffness in her neck said otherwise. "Better than I have in weeks. Thank you for everything. I don't know what we would have done if you hadn't stopped." Jake waved her gratitude away like it was nothing. "It's no big deal. You're here, the kids are safe, that's what matters." Clara hesitated, then asked the question that had been weighing on her since the night before. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know us." Jake set his coffee down and leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "I've been where you are," he said after a moment. "Not exactly the same, but close enough. My wife and I, well, we had some tough times. Lost our home once, back when we were starting out. I know what it feels like to have nowhere to go." He didn't elaborate, and Clara didn't push. She could see the shadow of pain in his eyes, a story he wasn't ready to share. Instead, she said, "Well, thank you. Really." Jake gave a small nod and picked up his coffee again. "I'll get started on your car in a bit. You should eat something. There's a diner down the street, tell them Jake sent you. They'll take care of you." Clara started to protest. She didn't have any money for food, but Jake held up a hand. "Don't argue. Just go. I'll be here when you get back." Clara bundled up her kids and walked to the diner, feeling the stares of strangers as she entered. Ridgewood was a small town, and newcomers weren't exactly common. She tried to ignore the judgment in their eyes as she found a booth near the back. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, brought over a plate of pancakes for the kids and a cup of coffee for Clara without her even asking. "Jake told me to take care of you," the waitress said with a smile. "Don't worry about the bill. Just let me know if you need anything else." Clara was overwhelmed by the kindness of this stranger. She thanked her and focused on her children, who were devouring the pancakes like they hadn't eaten in days, which, she realized with a pang of guilt, wasn't far from the truth. Back at the shop, Jake was elbow-deep in the engine of Clara's car. His apprentice, Sam, was handing him tools and asking questions, clearly eager to learn. Sam was young, probably in his early 20s, with a shock of red hair and an energy that reminded Jake of his younger self. "What's the story with this woman?" Sam asked as he handed Jake a wrench. "She seems, I don't know, different." Jake shot him a look. "Not different. Just down on her luck. Happens to more people than you'd think." Sam nodded, but he still looked curious. "You're putting a lot of time into this. You don't usually do freebies." Jake shrugged. "Sometimes you just gotta do the right thing, Sam. You'll understand when you're older." Sam didn't press further, but he watched Jake with a newfound respect. Over the years, he had seen his boss do a lot of things that didn't make sense on paper, taking jobs that barely paid, cutting deals for customers who were struggling, but this felt different. There was something personal about the way Jake was working on this car, like he wasn't just fixing it, but trying to fix something in himself as well. When Clara returned from the diner, Jake was still working. She stood in the doorway, watching him with a mix of gratitude and curiosity. He moved with precision, his hands steady despite the years of wear and tear they had endured. She wondered what his life had been like, what had made him the kind of man who would go out of his way to help a complete stranger. "Hey," Jake said, noticing her. "You're back. Good. I wanted to talk to you about the car." Clara braced herself. "How bad is it?" Jake wiped his hands on a rag and leaned against the workbench. "It's not good. The alternators shot, the battery's dead, and there's some serious rust eating away at the frame. Honestly, it's a miracle you made it as far as you did." Clara's heart sank. "I can't afford a new car," she said quietly. "I don't even have enough to fix this one." Jake hesitated, then said, "Look, I've got some spare parts lying around. They're not new, but they'll get the job done. And I'll take care of the labor. You don't have to worry about paying me." Clara stared at him, stunned. "Why? Why would you do that for me?" Jake looked away, his jaw tightening. "Let's just say someone did something like this for me once. I'm just paying it forward." She didn't know what to say. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she quickly wiped them away, embarrassed. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't even know how to thank you." Jake waved her off. "Just take care of those kids. That's thanks enough." Over the next few days, Clara and her children settled into a routine. They spent their days at the shop, the kids playing in the waiting area while Clara helped Sam organize tools and clean up the garage. She wasn't a mechanic, but she was resourceful, and she wanted to do something to repay Jake's kindness. The more she got to know him, the more she realized how much he had given up to help her. The shop wasn't exactly thriving. There were weeks when Jake barely made enough to cover the bills, and yet he had taken her in without a second thought. It wasn't just about the car anymore. Jake was giving her and her children a chance to start over. As the car repairs progressed, Clara began to notice small changes in Jake. He seemed lighter, more open, as if helping her was helping him heal some old wound. He still didn't talk much about his past, but she could see it in his eyes, the pain, the regret, and the determination to make things right. One evening, after the kids had fallen asleep, Clara and Jake sat in the waiting area, sipping coffee and talking quietly. She told him about her life before the breakdown, about the job she had lost and the husband who had walked out on her. Jake listened without judgment, nodding occasionally but never interrupting. When she finished, she said, "I feel like I've been stuck in this endless loop of bad luck. Like no matter what I do, it's never enough." Jake looked at her, his expression serious. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "Most people wouldn't have made it this far. You've got 2 kids depending on you, and you haven't given up. That says a lot." Clara didn't know how to respond. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. She felt a flicker of hope, a small but growing belief that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that she and her children might have a future worth fighting for. Over the next few days, Jake threw himself into the task of fixing Clara's car. The old sedan was a mess, and every time he thought he'd tackled one issue, another would rear its head. The alternator wasn't just shot, it was beyond salvage. The wiring was frayed, corroded from years of neglect, and the rust along the frame seemed determined to spread like an unwelcome disease. But Jake was nothing if not determined. He'd seen cars in worse condition and brought them back to life. The difference was, this time, it felt personal. Clara, for her part, did everything she could to help. While she didn't have mechanical expertise, she proved to be a quick learner. Under Jake's instruction, she started handing him tools, cleaning parts, and even attempting minor repairs. The kids stayed in the corner of the shop, entertained by Sam, who had a knack for storytelling and a seemingly endless supply of snacks hidden in the back of the garage. For the first time in weeks, Clara felt a sense of normalcy creeping back into her life. One rainy afternoon, as Jake was deep under the hood of the car, Clara stood beside him, wiping grease off an old spark plug he had handed her. "You've done so much for us already," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the sound of the rain tapping against the shop's roof. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Jake didn't look up. His hands were busy tightening bolts, his face a mask of concentration. "You don't have to repay me," he said finally. "Like I told you before, someone helped me once when I needed it. This is just my way of paying it forward." Clara tilted her head, watching him carefully. "What happened?" she asked, her tone gentle, not prying. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but I'd like to know." Jake hesitated, his hands pausing mid-motion. For a moment, the only sound was the rain and the occasional clink of metal as he set his wrench down. Finally, he sighed and leaned against the car, wiping his hands on a rag. "It was a long time ago," he began. "My wife and I were just starting out. We didn't have much, just this shop and a dream to build a life together. Then one day, everything fell apart. The bills piled up, the bank came calling, and before we knew it, we were on the verge of losing everything." He paused, his eyes distant, as if he were looking back through the years. "There was this old man in town, Mr. Calloway. He owned a general store down the road. He wasn't rich, but he had a big heart. When he heard about our situation, he came to me one day and handed me an envelope. Inside was enough money to save the shop. I tried to refuse, but he wouldn't hear of it. He said, 'When you've got the chance to help someone, you take it. And one day, you'll do the same for someone else.'" Clara listened, her heart aching for the man who had clearly carried this memory with him for years. "What happened to Mr. Calloway?" she asked softly. Jake's lips pressed into a thin line. "He passed away a few years later. Never got to pay him back, but I've tried to live by his example ever since." Clara didn't know what to say. She reached out and placed a hand on Jake's arm, a simple gesture of gratitude and understanding. He looked at her, his eyes softening, and gave a small nod before turning back to the car. "Now, let's get this thing running," he said gruffly, but there was a warmth in his tone that hadn't been there before. As the days turned into a week, the car began to take shape. Jake managed to source a used alternator from a nearby scrapyard, and Sam helped replace the damaged wiring. Clara even learned how to change the oil, a small victory that filled her with a surprising sense of pride. The kids grew more comfortable in the shop, their laughter echoing through the space as they played with an old set of plastic tools Sam had found in the back. But as progress was made on the car, other challenges loomed. Clara was still jobless, and every day without income brought her closer to a reality she didn't want to face. She had spent hours scouring local job boards and sending out applications, but the phone remained silent. It was a harsh reminder that her problems extended far beyond the broken-down car in Jake's shop. One evening, as Jake was locking up for the night, Clara approached him. "Jake, I need to ask you something," she said, her voice hesitant. "Shoot," he replied, slipping his hands into his pockets. "I've been looking for work, but nothing's come through. Do you know anyone in town who might be hiring? I'll do anything, cleaning, cooking, whatever it takes." Jake studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "I might know someone," he said finally. "There's a diner down the road, Hattie's Place. The owner, Hattie, is a tough old bird, but she's got a soft spot for hard workers. I'll put in a word for you." Clara's face lit up. "Really? Thank you, Jake. I'll go first thing in the morning." True to his word, Jake spoke to Hattie that night, and the next day, Clara found herself standing in the small, bustling diner. Hattie was a no-nonsense woman with a sharp tongue and an even char. Per eye for detail. "Jake says you're a hard worker," she said, eyeing Clara critically. "We'll see about that. Be here at 6 tomorrow morning, ready to work." Clara didn't mind the brusque tone. She was just grateful for the chance. That night, as she told Jake about the job, he gave her a rare smile. "You'll do great," he said simply. With the car repairs nearly complete and a job lined up, things were finally starting to look up for Clara. But life had one more curveball to throw. Late one evening, as Jake was tidying up the shop, he came across an old, tattered envelope wedged under the passenger seat of Clara's car. Curious, he opened it and found a stack of letters, yellowed with age. As he flipped through them, one name caught his eye, Calloway. The letters were addressed to Clara's father, a man Jake had known years ago but had long since lost touch with. The realization hit him like a freight train. Clara's father was the same man who had saved his shop all those years ago. Jake sat down heavily, the weight of the discovery settling over him. He had never believed in fate, but this felt like more than coincidence. The next morning, Jake handed Clara the envelope. "I found these under the seat," he said, watching her reaction closely. Clara's eyes widened as she recognized the handwriting. "These are my dad's," she said, her voice trembling. She flipped through the letters, her expression a mix of joy and sadness. "I thought I'd lost these forever." Jake hesitated, then said, "Clara, there's something you should know. Your dad, he was the man who helped me save this shop. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for him." Clara stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized the full extent of what Jake had done for her. "He always believed in helping people," she said softly. "I guess that's something he passed down to you." For a long moment, they sat in silence, the connection between them stronger than ever. Finally, Jake stood and clapped his hands. "All right, enough of this sentimental stuff. Let's finish this car." And together, they did. The day finally came when Jake declared Clara's car was ready. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was running again, a miracle considering the state it had been in when it first rolled into his shop. Clara couldn't believe it when Jake handed her the keys. She sat behind the wheel, running her hands over the steering wheel as if she couldn't trust it was real. Her kids climbed into the back seat, their excitement contagious. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. But Jake wasn't done. In the days leading up to finishing the repairs, he had been busy behind the scenes, calling in favors and speaking to people around town. Jake was a man of few words, but his reputation as a fair and dependable mechanic carried weight in Ridgewood. When he reached out to the community on Clara's behalf, people started to listen. Jake's first call was to Hattie, who had already given Clara a job at the diner. "She's a hard worker," Jake had said, "but she's got a tough road ahead. Think you can spread the word? Get the town behind her?" Hattie, who rarely showed her softer side, agreed without hesitation. Word began to spread about Clara and her kids, and soon people in Ridgewood were pitching in. A local grocer donated food baskets, while the church organized a fundraiser to help Clara with her immediate expenses. The owner of the thrift shop down the street offered free clothes for the children, and even a few of Jake's customers left small donations when they heard her story. It wasn't much, but for Clara, it felt like a lifeline. Jake didn't stop there. He reached out to his friend at the local community center, a retired teacher named Mrs. Crawford, who ran free classes and workshops. "Clara needs more than a job," Jake explained. "She needs a fresh start. You think you can help her get back on her feet?" Mrs. Crawford jumped at the chance. She met with Clara at the shop one afternoon and laid out a plan. "We've got classes on everything from computer skills to budgeting," she said. "I can help you put together a resume and connect you with resources to find housing. It's not going to be easy, but I think you've got the grit to do it." Clara was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. She had spent so long feeling invisible, like the world had given up on her. Now, for the first time in years, she felt seen. It wasn't just the material help, though she desperately needed that, it was the kindness, the belief that she was worth saving. It lit a fire in her, one she hadn't felt in a long time. Despite the growing support from the community, not everyone was on board. There were whispers around town, people questioning why Jake was going out of his way for a stranger. "She's just taking advantage of him," one man grumbled at the diner. "I heard she's been living off handouts for years." The rumors reached Jake, but he brushed them off. He knew what he was doing, and he didn't care what anyone else thought. Still, the negativity weighed on Clara. One afternoon, she confronted Jake in the garage. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted. "People are talking. They think I'm just some freeloader." Jake looked at her, his expression steady. "Let them talk," he said. "They don't know you. And if they're so worried about what I'm doing, maybe they should take a good look at themselves." Clara smiled weakly, but the doubt lingered. She had been knocked down so many times, and the idea of starting over felt daunting. Jake seemed to sense her hesitation. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "You've already been through the worst. This is just the beginning." As the weeks went on, Clara threw herself into her new job and the classes at the community center. She learned how to navigate online job boards, how to manage her finances, and even how to write a compelling cover letter. Every step forward felt like a victory, no matter how small. Meanwhile, Jake found himself becoming more involved than he had expected. He wasn't just fixing a car anymore, he was watching a family rebuild their lives. And it was changing him, too. For years, he had kept to himself, content to let the world pass him by. But helping Clara had reminded him of something he had almost forgotten, the joy of making a difference. Then came the fundraiser. Organized by the church and spearheaded by Mrs. Crawford, it was held in the town square on a sunny Saturday afternoon. There were tables laden with baked goods, a raffle, and even a small concert by the local high school band. Clara had been hesitant to attend, feeling unworthy of the attention, but Jake had insisted. "You're part of this community now," he told her. "Let them show you they care." The event was a resounding success. People who had once been strangers came up to Clara, introducing themselves and offering words of encouragement. The children ran around the square, their laughter filling the air, and for the first time in a long time, Clara felt like she belonged. But the day wasn't without its surprises. Toward the end of the fundraiser, a woman approached Clara, her face a mixture of shock and guilt. It was Amy, Clara's estranged sister. They hadn't spoken in years, not since a falling out after their father's death. Amy had heard about the fundraiser through mutual friends and had driven down from the city to see if the rumors were true. "Clara," Amy said, her voice trembling. "I had no idea things had gotten this bad. Why didn't you call me?" Clara stiffened, her old wounds rising to the surface. "Because the last time I needed you, you turned your back on me," she said, her voice cold. Amy looked stricken. "I know I messed up. I let my anger get in the way, and I'm sorry. I want to make things right." Jake watched from a distance, ready to step in if things got heated. But to his surprise, Clara sighed and said, "It's not just about me anymore. I have kids to think about. If you want to be part of their lives, you have to prove you're serious." Amy nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I will. I promise." The encounter left Clara feeling conflicted. She wanted to believe her sister had changed, but years of disappointment had made her cautious. Jake offered her a quiet word of advice later that evening. "People can surprise you," he said. "Sometimes, they just need a second chance." In the days that followed, Amy made good on her promise. She began visiting regularly, bringing groceries and helping Clara look for housing. For the first time in years, Clara felt the beginnings of a reconciliation. The fundraiser had not only brought in enough money to cover Clara's immediate needs but had also sparked something larger in Ridgewood. Inspired by Jake's actions, the town began organizing regular events to help families in need. Jake's shop became a hub for these efforts, with people dropping off donations and volunteering their time. Clara's car, once a symbol of her struggles, became a symbol of hope. It wasn't just a vehicle, it was a testament to the power of community and the kindness of one man who refused to turn a blind eye. As Clara drove away from the shop one afternoon, her kids singing in the back seat, she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Jake standing in the doorway, watching them go. She smiled, her heart full of gratitude. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face it. And she knew she wouldn't be facing it alone. The weeks that followed the fundraiser marked a turning point in Clara's life. With her car now functional, her new job at the diner, and the support of the Ridgewood community, she began to rebuild the pieces of her life that had felt so hopelessly scattered. Yet, the journey was far from easy. Every step forward was hard-won, and challenges seemed to emerge from places she hadn't anticipated. One of the first hurdles Clara faced was adjusting to her new routine. The early mornings at the diner were grueling, and the fast pace of the work often left her exhausted by the end of the day. Balancing her job with her classes at the community center and her responsibilities as a mother felt overwhelming at times. There were nights when she sat at the small kitchen table in her temporary housing, her head in her hands, wondering if she was truly strong enough to make it all work. But every time she felt like giving up, she thought about her children. Lily and Max had grown more energetic and happy since they'd moved out of the car. Lily, once shy and withdrawn, had started making friends at her new school, and Max's laughter filled the small apartment they now called home. Clara reminded herself that every ounce of effort she poured into her new life was for them. She couldn't let them down. Jake continued to play a pivotal role in Clara's life. He checked in on her regularly, often dropping by the diner for a cup of coffee and a quick chat during her shifts. His presence was steady and reassuring, a quiet reminder that she wasn't alone. Jake rarely offered advice outright, but his actions spoke louder than words. On one particularly tough day, when Clara vented about a difficult customer and the mountain of bills she was trying to tackle, Jake simply said, "One thing at a time. Fix what's in front of you, and the rest will follow." Clara took his words to heart. She tackled her challenges one by one, starting with her finances. With the help of Mrs. Crawford's budgeting class, she learned how to stretch every dollar, setting aside small amounts of her paycheck for savings and emergencies. She began to see progress, slow but steady, and the sense of control it gave her was empowering. Meanwhile, the community's support showed no signs of waning. The connections Clara had made during the fundraiser continued to grow, and she found herself forming friendships with people she never would have met otherwise. Hattie, the diner's owner, became something of a mentor to Clara, offering tough love and practical advice whenever it was needed. "You've got grit, kid," Hattie told her one day after a particularly hectic lunch rush. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Even Clara's relationship with her sister, Amy, began to mend. True to her word, Amy made regular visits, helping with the kids and offering moral support. They started having long conversations about their past, slowly unpacking the years of resentment and misunderstanding that had driven them apart. It wasn't easy, but it was a start. Clara found herself cautiously optimistic that they could rebuild their bond. But not everything was smooth sailing. There were moments when Clara felt the weight of her situation pressing down on her. One particularly difficult day came when Max fell ill with a fever. Clara had to miss a shift at the diner to take him to the doctor, and though Hattie was understanding, the lost wages meant she had to dip into her small savings to cover the cost of the visit and medication. It was a stark reminder of how precarious her situation still was. Jake noticed the strain on her face the next time she stopped by the shop to thank him for an oil change he had done on the house. "You holding up?" he asked, leaning against the counter. Clara hesitated before nodding. "Some days are harder than others, but we're getting there," she said, her voice resolute. Jake studied her for a moment before nodding. "You're tougher than most people I know," he said. "Don't forget that." It was a simple statement, but it meant the world to Clara. She carried those words with her, drawing strength from them whenever doubt threatened to creep in. Meanwhile, Jake found himself reflecting on how much had changed since he first stopped to help Clara on that stormy night. The shop, once a quiet and solitary place, had become a hub of activity. People from all over town stopped by, not just for car repairs, but to drop off donations, offer their time, or simply check in on Clara and her kids. Jake, who had always been content to keep to himself, found his life enriched by the connections he was forming. One day, as he worked on an old pickup truck, a customer asked him, "What made you stop that night?" Plenty of folks would have driven right past. Jake paused, wiping his hands on a rag. "I guess I just couldn't ignore it," he said. Sometimes, you see someone who needs help, and you know you've got to do something. It's not about being a hero. It's just about being human. The customer nodded thoughtfully. "Well, you've done a lot of good for that family. Makes the rest of us want to step up, too." Jake didn't say anything, but the words stayed with him. He hadn't set out to inspire anyone, but seeing the way the town had rallied around Clara made him realize the ripple effect of even the smallest act of kindness. As the weeks turned into months, Clara began to see the fruits of her hard work. She was promoted at the diner, earning a steady paycheck that allowed her to move into a more permanent apartment. Her kids were thriving, and the once overwhelming burden of survival had started to lift. She still had challenges to face, but she faced them with a newfound confidence. One evening, as she tucked her children into bed, Lily looked up at her and said, "Mommy, are we happy now?" The question caught Clara off guard. She sat on the edge of the bed, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's face. "Yes, sweetheart," she said softly. "We're happy. And we're safe." Later that night, Clara found herself thinking about Jake and all the people who had helped her along the way. She realized that her story wasn't just about her, it was about the power of community, of people coming together to lift each other up. And it was about the kindness of one man who had refused to look the other way. The next morning, Clara stopped by Jake's shop with a plate of cookies her kids had insisted on baking as a thank you. Jake accepted them with a gruff smile, pretending not to notice the tears in her eyes. "You did the hard part," he said. "I just gave you a little push." Clara shook her head. "You gave me a lot more than that. You gave me hope." Jake didn't respond, but the look in his eyes said it all. As Clara drove away, her kids laughing in the back seat, Jake watched them go, a sense of quiet satisfaction settling over him. He had fixed a lot of cars in his time, but this was something he would carry with him forever. Months passed, and Ridgewood seemed to embrace its newfound sense of community, sparked by Jake's selfless actions and Clara's resilience. Clara's life had taken on a new rhythm, one that didn't revolve around survival but growth. Her days at the diner were still busy, but she found satisfaction in the work, especially now that she was a shift manager. It wasn't just a title, it was proof of how far she'd come. Her kids, Lily and Max, were thriving in school, and their laughter filled their modest but cozy apartment. But even as her life began to stabilize, Clara often found herself reflecting on the people who had made it possible, particularly Jake. The gruff mechanic had been the first to see her as more than a lost cause. He had believed in her when she couldn't even believe in herself. It was a debt she could never fully repay, but she was determined to try. One day, after her morning shift, Clara stopped by Jake's shop. She carried a pie, freshly baked and still warm, as a token of gratitude. Jake looked up from under the hood of a truck as she walked in, his hands black with grease. "Brought you something," Clara said, setting the pie on the counter. Jake wiped his hands on a rag and raised an eyebrow. "You know you don't have to keep thanking me," he said, though the faint smile on his face betrayed his appreciation. "It's not just thanks," Clara replied. "I wanted to talk to you about something." Jake leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "What's on your mind?" Clara hesitated, gathering her thoughts. "I've been thinking a lot about what you've done for me and my kids. You didn't just fix my car, you gave us a chance to rebuild our lives. And I want to do that for others. I want to pay it forward, like you've been doing all these years." Jake studied her, his expression unreadable. "What are you thinking?" "I want to start a community outreach program," Clara said, her voice gaining confidence as she spoke. "Something that helps families who are struggling, like I was. It could be anything, finding resources, offering temporary housing, or even just giving people a safe place to go when they have nowhere else. I don't have all the details worked out yet, but I know it's something I need to do." Jake was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. "It's a good idea," he said. "And I think you're the right person to make it happen." Clara smiled, relieved by his support. "I was hoping you'd say that, because I'd like your help." Jake chuckled, shaking his head. "You're not gonna let me retire in peace, are you?" "Not a chance," Clara said, grinning. Together, they began brainstorming ideas for the program. Jake offered to let them use part of his shop as a temporary meeting space, and Clara reached out to Mrs. Crawford and Hattie for advice on organizing resources. Word spread quickly, and soon other members of the community were stepping forward to help. The local church offered to host workshops, and a retired carpenter volunteered to teach basic repair skills. Even the skeptical townsfolk who had once doubted Clara's intentions began to come around, inspired by the growing movement. The program, which Clara decided to call Ridgewood Rising, officially launched with a community open house at the shop. The turnout exceeded everyone's expectations. Families came to share their stories, volunteers signed up to lend their skills, and donations poured in. Clara stood at the center of it all, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. Jake watched from the sidelines, leaning against his workbench. He'd never been one for the spotlight, but seeing the impact Clara was making filled him with a quiet satisfaction. She had taken what little he had given her and turned it into something extraordinary. As Ridgewood Rising gained momentum, Clara found herself busier than ever. She juggled her job, her family, and the demands of the program with a determination that left even Jake impressed. She often stopped by the shop to update him on their progress, and he always listened, offering advice when she needed it and a steadying presence when things felt overwhelming. One evening, after a particularly long day, Clara sat with Jake in the shop's small office. They sipped coffee from mismatched mugs, the warm glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows on the walls. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" Clara asked, her voice thoughtful. Jake nodded. "Every day. You've done something amazing, Clara. I hope you know that." "I couldn't have done it without you," she said. "You gave me a second chance." Jake shook his head. "You earned that chance. All I did was give you a little push." Clara smiled, but her expression grew serious. "Do you ever think about what Mr. Calloway would say if he could see this?" Jake leaned back in his chair, a faraway look in his eyes. "I think he'd be proud," he said finally. "Of both of us." The months turned into a year, and Ridgewood Rising became a cornerstone of the community. It wasn't just about helping families in crisis, it was about creating a culture of kindness and mutual support. People who had once been strangers now worked together, united by a shared belief that no one should face life's challenges alone. Clara's life continued to evolve. With the program's success, she began speaking at events and sharing her story, hoping to inspire others to take action in their own communities. Her children, now thriving and full of confidence, often joined her, reminding everyone of the real impact of their efforts. Jake, though still content to stay in the background, found his shop busier than ever. People came not just for repairs but for advice, for connection, and sometimes just to say thank you. He didn't mind the change, in fact, he welcomed it. His once quiet life had become something far richer and more meaningful than he could have ever imagined. One crisp autumn afternoon, Clara and her children stopped by the shop. Jake was under a car, as usual, but he crawled out when he saw them, wiping his hands on a rag. "What brings you by?" he asked. "We just wanted to see you," Clara said, smiling. "And to tell you that Ridgewood Rising got a grant. We're going to be able to expand, help even more families." Jake's eyes lit up, and for a moment, he looked almost proud. "That's good news," he said. "You've done something real here, Clara." "So have you," she said. "We couldn't have done any of this without you." Jake didn't respond, but the look in his eyes said everything. As Clara and her kids drove away, he stood in the doorway of the shop, watching them go. The sun was setting, casting the town in a warm, golden light. Ridgewood had changed, and so had he. Jake turned back to his work, a quiet smile on his face. He didn't need recognition or accolades. Knowing he had made a difference was enough. And as he picked up his tools and got back to work, he knew that the ripple effect of one small act of kindness would continue to spread, touching lives in ways he could only begin to imagine.